Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of District 79 webinars. I am DTM Akanki Abdul-Khalik, the District 79 webinar manager for 2015-2016, and this will be our final webinar for this term, and we're delighted to have all of you with us today. Today's session is about deep intelligence, the critical intelligences for leadership success in the 21st century. And we have an amazing guest with us today. Her name is Cindy Wigglesworth, and I'd like to introduce Cindy to everyone and let you know more about her. But before I do that, I want to let you know how you can engage with us as an audience. Let me just get my PowerPoint acting right here. Okay, so as attendees, what you can do, you have a control panel, and on the left side of your control panel, you can click an icon that's a hand. It will raise your hand, and that lets me know that you would actually like me to open your mic so that I can welcome you to ask a question yourself or make a comment. Likewise, if you don't necessarily want to speak, but you would like to engage with us by typing a question or comment, you can do that by typing it in the question section that's highlighted on my screen now. You'll see it on your side in your control panel. And when it's an appropriate time, I will either open your mic or read your question for you or your comment, and then we will engage that way. Also, we may have some polling today. So if you see a poll come up on your screen, you'll have about 15 seconds to respond to the poll and give us your opinion or answer a question, and then we'll share the results of that with everyone once the polling is closed. So let me go ahead and introduce our wonderful guest. Cindy Wigglesworth is our guest today, and she is an amazing person that I've had the opportunity to actually work with and train from, actually, I should say. She is the author of SQ21, the 21 Skills of Spiritual Intelligence, and she's a recognized expert in the field of spiritual intelligence and an experienced leadership coach and corporate consultant. Her SQ21 Spiritual Intelligence Self-Assessment is a diversity, appropriate, and skills-based way of discussing powerful human motivators and success factors. After working for 20 years in a Fortune 50 company in human resources, she formed her own company in 2000 and created her multiple intelligence approach to leadership development, using a combination of four intelligences: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. She coaches senior executives to overcome barriers to their own career success and helps them lead their organizations to greatness. And you can find out more about Cindy and her work by visiting her website at www.deepchange.com. Cindy, thank you so very much for being our guest today. I'm honored that you've accepted our invitation, and we're glad to have you. Welcome.
It's my pleasure. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Fabulous, wonderful. Well, I'm so delighted to be here. It's quite an honor, Kanke. I've been looking forward for us to have an opportunity to work together. So happy that you chose to get certified in SQ21, and I know the work that you're doing is going to bring great value to the world.
Thank you so much. So now we're going to go ahead and dive into this, and I just want to remind our attendees again, Cindy's going to be presenting some information, and at any time, if you have a question or a comment, just go ahead and type it or raise your hand. We're going to take some breaks in between her presentation and entertain your questions and comments, and I will have some questions for her as well based upon what she'll be presenting. So we want this to definitely be an interactive session. We want you to engage and ask questions because this is some information that we don't talk about often. And I want to just say that the idea that there is more to effective leadership than high IQ is now well accepted. In the past 2 decades, Daniel Goleman's groundbreaking research on emotional intelligence has been widely embraced by the business community, and it is no longer uncommon to find leaders being assessed on qualities such as emotional intelligence. And as leaders confront today's increasingly challenging business environment, but even IQ is not the only thing that helps them survive and thrive. And Cindy, as an organizational consultant and author, believes that there are 4 critical intelligences that today's leaders need to develop. as mentioned before. And when these four come together, she says that the result is deep intelligence, which is something that's necessary to lead a transformative organization in a fast changing and unpredictable world. So, Cindy, you have an interesting story. And by the way, I just want to say that I'm Akanke again, webinar manager and Toastmaster of the Year for last year. And we will go ahead and get started. Cindy, I can switch over to you and I'm going to ask your question also. So let me ask your question. You have an interesting career path that is related to something that we here in the Middle East, especially in Saudi Arabia, are very familiar with, which is the oil industry. Most of your career took place at a major oil company. Is that correct?
Yes, in fact, my father was also in the oil industry, so I was raised in the oil industry. We were expatriates for a good bit of my childhood, so we traveled and I got to see a lot of the world, which is wonderful. And I spent 20 years in human resources at ExxonMobil.
And so part of that was you had a rude awakening, so to speak, that led you into the into finding out more about emotional intelligence. It was before that term was coined. Tell us about that rude awakening that you had that sort of led you down a path towards this kind of this research.
Yeah, it's one of those moments of, in hindsight, you go, oh, how could I not have known that? But I came out of college, very well educated with a bachelor's and a master's degree from a major university here in the United States, Duke University, which is very well known here, and a little too impressed with my own IQ. I went to work for Exxon, which of course hires people out of these major universities who are all very bright, and being very competitive myself and wanting to prove myself both as a young professional but also especially as a woman, like I'm going to prove that women can do this. I really was leading all the time from the task, get the task done and show how smart I am. And that orientation of needing to be the smartest person in the room and having to get the task done left people feeling a bit like they'd been run over by a truck. So I started getting feedback from
Cindy, we lost you. Can you hear me?
the work you're getting done, and we all know that your heart's in the right place and you're working really hard, but you might want to think about softening the edges. And what they were trying to tell me
Okay, Cindy.
tells you that you need better interpersonal skills.
Cindy, if you
What?
can hear me, if you can hear me, hold on one second because you
Yes,
dropped out. I just want to check in with our attendees to see if
yes,
you're dropping out for them as well, so that we can just check the quality. Hold on for me one second. So, attendees,
sure.
um, if you can just tell me if you can hear Cindy or if you're hearing Cindy drop out a little bit, or if you're hearing me, let me know by typing something in the question. Cindy is pretty clear. Okay, great. Thank you, Toastmaster Noor, for sharing that with us. Okay, so Cindy, keep going, and your story is very interesting. So they told you you needed to soften yourself around the edges and stop running over people, basically.
Yeah. Right, because I had bought into and it's the thing that many young people buy into, I'm going to prove how smart and how valuable I am by getting these things done, task, task, task.
Mhm.
And an over-focus on task to the exclusion of developing relationships actually backfires. But it was one of the first things I had to learn.
Okay.
Back at the time I was learning this, the work of emotional intelligence had not yet been published. So as I'm being asked to develop interpersonal skills and I'm thinking, okay, how? That was more of a challenge back then because the road wasn't as clearly mapped. So I started taking the leadership programs that were available at Exxon. I learned about Myers-Briggs and how to soften my style in that regard. And mostly I started imitating people who I saw behaving in meetings in ways that I thought were intelligent and productive and people liked them.
Mhm.
And I thought, okay, I can do that. I can copy that. And so over time I slowly kind of learned the process of emotional intelligence. When Daniel Goleman's book came out, I was just like wishing that someone had handed me that when I was in my 20s,
Mhm.
because they outlined skills of emotional intelligence in a way that even with my left brain logical orientation, I could break it down, I could understand it, and in particular, understanding the importance of emotional self-awareness as a predecessor skill, which we'll get to as we go through the slides.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
then you want me to continue on to the SQ piece of this?
well, what I'm going to do now is let's just segue into
Mm-hmm.
your presentation. I'm going to switch over to your
Mm-hmm.
screen, and you're going to get a
Mm-hmm.
notification on your side that says we want to share your screen. And when you see that, you can click yes, share my screen, and then you can actually launch your slideshow and go into your presentation.
All right. Can you see it?
Yes, we see it.
Excellent. All right, well, I'm going to walk through kind of an overview, couple of slides, and then I'm going to get into EQ first. Then we'll pause, and then we'll get into spiritual intelligence. So here are the overview slides. The first slide shows you multiple intelligences, looking at the 4 most critical intelligences for leaders. And those, in my experience, are IQ. You need to have it. You need to have a certain amount to misunderstand anyone who's listening to think that IQ is not important. It is important. It's just one of 4 things that are important.
Hmm.
The other 3 intelligences that we see here are emotional intelligence, or EQ, spiritual intelligence, or SQ, and physical intelligence, or PQ. What this vertical bar chart is showing us is that you can be at different levels of development on these different lines of intelligence. So this is a useful partial truth. To some degree, these intelligences are independent. So you can be highly developed on the cognitive line, just medium development on the EQ line, underdeveloped on SQ, highly developed on PQ, or any other combination.
Hmm.
So this is a useful partial truth. I'll
Okay.
do one more slide on this, and I'll explain what I mean by these terms.
Okay.
The second slide, which is also partial but useful, is this vertical pyramid where you see PQ, or physical intelligence, on the bottom. Now, this is on the bottom in 2 respects. It's on the bottom because it is the first intelligence that is of focus for a newborn infant. For people who have been around very young children, mastering our body is a big effort. When we are first born, we have to learn to focus our eyes, turn over, crawl, walk, run. All of those things are very effortful for young children. And then as adults, as we maintain our body awareness and use our body skillfully, what it starts to mean over time is we take good care of our body. We get enough. It's developmentally the first really big thing that infants have to work on. It's also on the bottom because it is foundational to all the other intelligences.
Hmm. Okay.
Just don't get good nutrition and you get very sick and unhealthy, it's going to affect your cognitive skills, and it's going to impair your ability to handle interpersonal relationships. You'll get irritable, and you're certainly going to lose your ability to keep your inner wisdom. So moving up this, you can think of this developmentally. Young children are focused on PQ. They're also developing IQ. I don't want to minimize this, so this is an oversimplified diagram. But the preschool years have a heavy focus on PQ. We then go to school, and the school years generally focus most of all on IQ development, particularly math, science, verbal, history, all of those kinds of things, the things you would get tested for before you apply to college. When you leave high school or whenever you leave college, the focus in life tends to shift to EQ as being the most important thing you need to work on. Not that IQ is not important, but our brain has developed by the time we're age 22 to 25 to support fully our emotional intelligence skills, and our life is demanding it. Once we begin working, relationship skills become crucial to success. In our personal life, if we're having romantic relationships, getting married, having children, emotional intelligence skills are crucial to the success of those relationships as well. So IQ is the focus often of the schooling years, but EQ becomes demanded increasingly as we move into our 20s and beyond. SQ is at the top. It's the top of this pyramid for two reasons, one of which you need a little bit of EQ in order to develop the SQ. So there's a little bit of sequencing happening here, but it's also the apex or the top, the most sophisticated of the intelligences. And you can see the short definition here, which I will expand on in a little bit, is that spiritual intelligence goes beyond EQ, moving from managing just our interpersonal skills to being guided by wisdom and compassion and being able to maintain inner and outer peace regardless of the situation. So that's the very high level to a Conke, but one of the terms I need to define is intelligence, and then I'm going to define spirituality and religion because I know that's an issue coming up as well.
Yes,
Intelligence, intelligence is, from a psychological standpoint, usually defined as some kind of innate potential that's brought into form through practice. The little girl playing the piano is an illustration of this. If she is born musically gifted, but never studies piano, never practices piano, never learns music theory, her capacity will be constrained. She will not bring her musical intelligence into form through practice. Emotional intelligence has, like, we have this innate potential, but if we never learn, if we never practice, we may have a native high IQ, but if we never are given a chance to develop our problem-solving skills, our technical skills, and so on, we haven't brought it into form. In the same way, I would say that all beings are born spiritual. So all humans are born spiritual. We are not born spiritually intelligent. And that distinction is crucial because spiritual intelligence is a set of skills developed over time through effort and practice. The end result of effort and practice is we get something that we need, something that is an appropriately reasoned behavior or choice, also called adeptness. So these intelligences, all of the lines of intelligences, are needed for different things. For leadership, we need the four that I have mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Moment.
Cindy, you're dropping out for me, so I want you to.
Connected to something larger than ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I define religion as a structure that supports our spiritual needs. It is a group of people with a set of beliefs, a set of practices, potentially a sacred text or texts that are supportive of this innate spiritual need.
Mm-hmm.
Religion is ideally designed to support us in meeting our spiritual needs, but spiritual intelligence is a set of skills. So spiritual intelligence does not require specific beliefs. A religion can be supportive of developing spiritual intelligence, but spiritual intelligence itself is a set of matters. It is a fairly inflexible ability in that we are born with some kind of ceiling of how, like, I'm not going to be Stephen Hawking or Albert Einstein. I have a certain innate limit, but I can get trained up to my limit. EQ is a little different in that we don't seem to have a limit. We can become as emotionally intelligent as we choose to be, assuming we have no deficits in our empathy brain circuit. So assuming we have no brain problems, we can become as emotionally intelligent as we're willing to put the effort in. From a research standpoint, we know that IQ will help the job. It will get you in the door. It's called a threshold intelligence. So it unlocks the door to say you have enough IQ to become an engineer, to become a secretary, to become a lawyer, to whatever your profession is, to become that. But what differentiates people once you get through the door, everybody's got that IQ or higher. Now what differentiates you is EQ. So IQ matters, it gets you in the door, but EQ makes you successful. Now we can know for sure that probably everyone on this call has known someone who was intellectually brilliant, but was really poor at interpersonal skills. And some of us may have worked for this person, some of us may be this person, or like me, have been this person.
Mm-hmm.
From a leadership training standpoint is a powerful way of helping people understand why this man or this woman who is otherwise so technically gifted is really stuck as a leader. People don't like working for them, people don't even like to be on teams with them. What's going on? And so then we can help people develop. There's a lot of brain science which we don't have time to go into today, but which has helped us understand how this is so confusing. Like, where is the IQ located in the brain? Where is EQ located in the brain? How do we teach people about these things? While not going into the detail, I will tell you that the limbic system, which is an older part of the brain, is part of our fight or flight system. And when we are activated in fear, we actually turn off blood flow to certain parts of our neocortex where our higher thinking, our IQ is. So when we don't manage our emotions well, when we allow fear or anger to take over, we lose IQ points. We do not think as well. So there's a real advantage to gaining emotional intelligence so that we can also keep our IQ fully on board. And I think that's all I'll say about this at this point.
Okay.
Now let's look at the 4 quadrants of emotional intelligence. We've got a couple of slides on EQ and EQ skills, and then we'll open it up for conversation. The 4 quadrants of emotional intelligence, sometimes called EI, sometimes called EQ, Goleman and Boyatzis in this model called it EI, are the set of skills that they've noticed differentiated outstanding performers from average performers. And when they looked at those skills, they found they fell into 4 clusters. They named those clusters self-awareness in the upper left, social awareness, upper right, self-management, lower left, and relationship skills or social skills in the lower right. What people want is what's in the lower right, but what they found out is you can't get there without doing the precursor work indicated by the yellow arrows, meaning we have to start with self-awareness to develop social awareness. We have to start with self-awareness to develop self-management. And from those 3 quadrants, we can develop good relationship skills, which leads to positive impacts on other people. On this slide, you can see that the skills themselves are listed. Looks like I had a little trouble with font color. I apologize. But the first skill listed under self-awareness is emotional self-awareness. This is the number 1 see how emotionally self-aware the leader is. This means, emotional self-awareness means, I can name my emotion at the moment I'm experiencing it, and I understand what triggered it. So if I'm feeling anger, I can name it, and I can understand, oh, I'm getting angry because Mary just interrupted me, and it's a big trigger for me, and so I'm having my usual reaction to Mary interrupting me. That enables better emotional self-control, which is in the next down box, the self-management. I get triggered by this. I need to breathe. I know I need to calm myself down. Emotional self-awareness also enables empathy. I know this triggers me, so I'll be less likely to interrupt somebody else because I'm likely to trigger them. So appropriate empathy, understanding, and anticipating other people's emotional reactions. When those 3 skills, which I call the meta skills, Daniel Goleman called them that at one point, enable everything that's in the lower right quadrant. Developing other people, being an inspirational leader, having influence on people, being a good catalyst for change, helping to change your organization, being good at conflict management, and being good at teamwork and collaboration. So if you want any of those, you need the precursor skills. How do you get the precursor skills? There are some exercises you can do, and it's also super important that you recognize I have to start with self-awareness We start there to get to the lower right quadrant. How can I make my self-awareness as big as possible? The bigger that first square that's red is, the larger the fourth square that's red can be. People. And I like to say there are three levels of feedback. Initially, reactions to feedback. Initially, we resist feedback. That's not true. You don't understand, blah, blah, blah. We get defensive. At level 2, we understand we have to have it, and we are grudgingly accepting of it, and we work on ourselves. At level 3, we realize it's priceless, and we actually seek feedback. So emotional intelligence, we've now kind of concluded this section, is the foundation for what's going to come with spiritual intelligence. So we can hit the pause now if you want, Akanke, and take questions.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much, Cindy, for that overview. Very useful and insightful. We do have a couple of questions. One from Abdullah Al Nafisa. Abdullah is saying, is it important to be sociable with specific people to get good EQ?
Some people are harder than other people. That may be part of that question. I would say empathy as a skill set is important to be able to be deployed to those who you dislike just as much as those you like, to be employed for those who are your bosses as well as for those who are your subordinates or your customers or your peers. So in a most general way, you would want to be able to do these skills with anybody.
Mm-hmm.
The only exception to this would be not to get overwhelmed by empathy. Too much empathy for too long is exhausting, and we can talk about that maybe a little more when we talk about spiritual intelligence, because that's a key distinction in spiritual intelligence, is the ability to balance empathy appropriately.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. And a question from Shafi Mohammed. The question is, spiritual intelligence, as you said, is something that you build without proper practice. How can a person get to a level of spirituality? And there's the way that the question is typed is grammatically not. I'm having to interpret what he's saying. So it says spiritual intelligence, as you said, it is you have to build it without proper practice. How can a person get into that level of spiritual intelligence or spirituality?
Right. So I would take a guess at what the intention is here. Is like, do you have to have a religious or a spiritual explicit practice? And I would say many people get good at things by doing them somewhat intuitively or instinctively. Some people seem to just know how to build emotional intelligence skills, and they start young and they do it, and they're excellent. They're just excellent. It's like, how did they do that? Did they do that because their parents were role models, or because they're gifted, or their schools were great? I don't know. I think some people are gifted in spiritual intelligence, and they seem to sense into the muscle they need to build. You know, I think of these things as like muscles we need to build. Some people are gifted physical athletes, other people have to work at it. I'm not sure how else to answer the question, because we got sort of this section coming up on spiritual intelligence. You have to build a muscle. The question is, do you just naturally move into building these muscles because you're drawn to it, because you're exposed to it through your family, through your faith, through whatever? Or does life have to smack you pretty hard on the side of the head to wake you up and say you need to be less selfish and you need to develop these skills? So I think there's some mystery to that.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. As human beings, we usually change by tradition or by trauma. We change
Mm-hmm.
because it's the tradition for us to go from one phase of life to another, to do certain things as we transition into different phases of our life. We make those traditional changes, or we get smacked, as you said, by some trauma that forces us to change. And I think part of the being an emotionally intelligent and um, a person who's skilled at being emotionally intelligent is to consciously choose change and to choose the appropriate change that will make you a better person. Is that correct? Conscious.
Totally correct.
Mm.
Yes, that is, I think, the purpose of a human life is to reduce our egoic self-concern and transcend that to become the noblest self that we can become.
Yes, definitely. So we have another question. How can you improve IQ level? Is it inborn?
The research seems to show that the upper limit is inborn, but getting yourself up to your full capacity is education and practice. So getting good at math requires having good math teachers and practicing math. Getting good at logical thinking requires that someone help you understand what is logical thinking and when have you made an illogical argument. I mean, there's whole schools of philosophy around logic and understanding what is sound logic, what is not sound logic. So it's the upper limit seems to be set genetically, but the ability to fully embody your capacity comes from training.
Okay. And the beautiful thing that you said about these other intelligences, that they are all learned skills, that um, if your bar for EQ is a little low, then you can cultivate the skill. If your physical intelligence is low, you can increase it by learning the competencies that will help you to become better at taking care of your body or having better awareness about your physical body. So that's the encouraging takeaway from all of this, is that any of these can be improved consciously if you choose to do it. Okay, so if you would like, we have no more questions. You can go back into your presentation and move forward with that.
Great, let's do that. So let's move on now to talk about spiritual intelligence, which of course is the most recent conversation in the leadership arena, and also a difficult one to have because people are not quite sure what are we talking about. So typically, when I'm doing a workshop, I like to start by having people in groups think about who are the noblest humans you've ever known about. And you can do this yourself, just as you're sitting there listening to me talk. Who comes to mind for you as the embodiment of human nobility, not in the aristocracy sense, but noble characteristics, like what is it that is the best of humanity? And think of one or two people. They don't have to be people you've ever met. They could even be fictional people from novels or plays, but people that you admire as being exceptional is what we're looking for. And here you see a couple of examples that often come up in my asking people about it. You see Martin Luther King Jr. and Mahatma Gandhi. As I go forward, you see this is a fairly common list of who would get named. So in categories, typical list would include major religious figures, which depending on what part of the world I'm in, different ones will be in more prominence, in and so on. And the Dalai Lama seems to be named a great deal of the time all over the world because he travels so much and I think is admired by many people. We get saints of various religions. In Christianity, Mother Teresa often comes up. We also get political leaders who are change agents. They may also have been Thich Nhat Hanh. Sometimes relatives are named, like in my life, the person might say, it was my grandfather so-and-so who was a real exemplary human being and taught me how to be spiritual. There might be local religious leaders, there might be authors that people have been inspired by, and sometimes we'll have coworkers or others in healthcare. I've often had nurses say that the patients they serve have often been spiritual leaders or spiritual teachers for them. And in all of my years of doing this, I've had 4 bosses be named as spiritual leaders. So it just goes to show it's possible to be a boss and to also be viewed as a spiritually intelligent leader. Then the second question I like to ask, which is a really important question, is why do you admire these people? Less important to me than the name of the person is the why. Why do you admire these people? And this seems to transcend pretty much all over the world. Doesn't matter who I talk to, these kind of characteristics seem to come up. That these people are loving or compassionate, humble, wise, courageous, faithful, forgiving, accepting, calm and centered, extremely honest, high integrity, perfect authenticity, those kinds of things, peaceful, nonviolent, outstanding teachers, able to inspire others, great leaders, persistent in the face of tremendous difficulties, and are able to see the gifts inside of other people and help others develop them. This is a shorter list. There are other words that sometimes come up, but it gives you a flavor for what people generally admire. Now, I find this inspiring and hopeful because when you're developing a new domain like spiritual intelligence, you have to describe what are you talking about. And when I get people together, this is essentially what people see as a spiritually intelligent person, is a person who embodies these characteristics. So while we haven't had many decades of research or even decades of writing on the topic of spiritual intelligence, what we have had is sort of this general agreement that's existed potentially for centuries about what it is that makes someone spiritually intelligent. So I started my research work thinking about, like what's the goal? Who are we trying to these people behave with love? But love in the English language is a problem. The word is a problem because English-speaking people use that word in a very sloppy way. We would say, I love my children, and I love ice cream. Now, ice cream's great, but that's not the same thing as how we feel about my children. So children versus pizza, ice cream, whatever, this is very confusing. So I needed a different word other than love. And I went searching for a definition that was not too academic sounding or too long. And I found a beautiful parable from the Eastern traditions. And that parable says that love is a bird with two wings. One wing is wisdom, the other wing is compassion. If either wing is broken, the bird cannot fly. And that definition gave me goosebumps. I just loved it, and I thought, that's brilliant. It's like the best of the mind, wisdom, and the best of the heart, compassion, must come together at the same time for loving action to take place. If I behave just from intellect and have no heart, I can do harm. If I just come in with empathy and kindness, but I have no wisdom, I can unintentionally do harm. So the two together, that's really important. And now you'll understand where the definition of spiritual intelligence comes from. It is the ability to behave with wisdom and compassion, love, while maintaining inner and outer peace, regardless of the situation. And when I think of that definition, and I think about the exemplary human beings that we named on the earlier slide, this seems to fit. This seems to describe, in their best moments, these weren't perfect humans, but in their best moment, what did Martin Luther King have that was exceptional? What did Gandhi have that was exceptional? And so on. And they seem to have this. This was exceptional about them. And the word behave is important because loving people in theory is easy. Showing up with loving behaviors is hard work. So spiritual intelligence is about the hard work. What does it mean in a practical application? The simplest way I can explain it is it's about getting over our immature ego self. You see the guy on the left is sort of combing his one hair that he has left, and he's very obsessed with his appearance. And the woman is pointing her finger outward like she's blaming somebody or scolding somebody. The ego is a little too self-concerned. We worry about our image, and we worry about being right, and we need to make other people wrong. So we want to grow up, and growing up means we have to mature our ego self and put it in service to our higher self. And you see these wonderful faces of wise elders. There's something so beautiful in their eyes that it's no longer all about appearance or whatever. There's something that sees more deeply. So the shift from ego self to higher self is shifting from the part of us that is fearful, angry, separated from other people, likes to engage in drama, especially victim, but also aggressor roles and enabling roles. It thinks the whole story of itself is its physical body. It is a necessary, I believe the ego is a necessary part for us to function as human beings, but we need to grow it up and we need to move it out of the driver's seat of our lives and put higher peaceful part of you, your more spiritual nature. When you act from this aspect of yourself, you wouldn't care if it was published on the front page of the newspaper, because it's this wiser, kinder, gentler place. Doesn't mean you can't be forceful. I don't like people to confuse this and say, well, to be spiritual means you have to be weak. That's not what I mean. But when you operate from higher self, even if you set a strong boundary, you're doing it from a loving place and you're keeping the big picture in mind. The short visual I keep here is like this one. My ego can sit in the front seat of the car of my life as the navigator, but I want my higher self driving. The ego can have useful information about other egos, about how humans are likely to get their feelings hurt. And so my ego will sense I've wounded somebody else's ego, and that's useful information. But I want higher self driving the car of my life. How do I get there? Oops, I seem to have popped out. I'm going
That's
to have to.
restart. No problem.
Why don't we take questions?
Yeah, sure. Because I have a question about something you just
Mm-hmm.
said. So, if in the example that you just gave, if your ego
Mm-hmm.
recognizes that you may have hurt someone else's ego, you may have said something wrong or done something inappropriate unintentionally. If you were egocentric, you would say, well, they'll get over it. But if you were,
Or,
yes,
or tough, they deserve it, you know?
right. Okay. And if you were spirit centric, you would respond in another way by perhaps apologizing or inquiring about how did that feel to you? Did I offend you? Or can you describe those two possibilities, Cindy, for us in terms of how a person would respond?
Sure. So if I sense that I have a. So clearly, the problem is yours because you misunderstood my intention. You shouldn't have become offended because that wasn't my intention. Or if you're um,
Hmm.
we might dig in and make it worse and escalate the problem.
Uh-huh.
Or we might, the other thing that we do, we play victim. If you got mad at me, I might not confront you about it, but go out in the hallway and gossip about you. You won't believe what she said to me in the meeting. She got all offended and then she interrupted me and then blah, 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 blah. And gossip, of course, in that kind of gossip is very destructive.
Hmm.
So we take our wounds and we either attack or we go play victim and escalate a negative story.
Hmm.
Now, a spiritual response is to say, you're offended. I'm sorry. Please explain. It's possible that I did nothing wrong, but you saw something. So I want to see what you saw. So my curiosity is piqued. I know I'm more coming from my higher self when my curiosity is engaged in a loving way, so that I ask questions that don't feel like an attack, but that feel genuinely interested and would say something to you like, I'm so sorry, tell me what I said that was troublesome, you know, and the person will say, well, I heard what your department is doing is very important. What I intended to say, and I must not have said it well, was this. So help me say it in a way that might be better. There's more of a collaborative win-win. Doesn't mean you have to be weak or wimpy. Sometimes people misunderstand that. But in non-defensiveness can be tremendous strength, because when someone pushes back on you and they're expecting you to come back and defend in a sort of aggressive way, and instead you get curious, if you're genuinely curious and you reach an understanding through that curiosity, you've made a big deposit in the emotional bank account of that relationship. I think of it as like a checking account where you have positive deposits and then you have withdrawals where you've taken money out. Yeah, so genuine interest is a big deposit.
Okay, great. Thank you, Cindy, for explaining that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so we can go ahead with the rest of your presentation. We don't have any questions. Well, there's one that just came in. Are the levels of multiple intelligences shown on one of the first slides proportionate to each other? Um, let's see. Are the levels? This is from Noor Mohammed. She's asking, are the levels of multiple intelligences that was shown on one of the first slides proportionate to each other? I'm not exactly sure about her
Yeah,
question.
that was just an illustration, and so each person will have different ones, and I'm not sure what she's meaning by proportionate. Are they of equal importance, maybe? And it would depend on your life and your goals as to which intelligences are most important. In some jobs, IQ might be very, very important, like people working at NASA to get the, astronauts to the moon. We need them to have super high IQ. But on other jobs, maybe we need average IQ, but we might need very high EQ in certain jobs or very high SQ in certain jobs. And so it would be variable as to what the demand.
Mm-hmm.
What you see on slide 23 is the list of 21 spiritual intelligence skills. There are 4 quadrants of skills which are designed to be one step up from the 4 quadrants of emotional intelligence. So instead of emotional self-awareness as a quadrant in the upper left, I have ego self, higher self as the quadrant. Ego self is the small s self, higher self is the capital S self. And how can I be aware of my higher self? And you see there's 5 skills there which are involved in being fully aware of your own ego and of your higher self. Then quadrant 2, universal awareness. Instead of being other awareness or social awareness, it's universal awareness. Quadrant 3 are the skills related with ego self, higher self mastery. Most important being skill 13, your ability to keep your higher self in charge. And then quadrant 4, the outcome quadrant, just like with EQ, you need the other 3, enough skills in the other 3 quadrants to get to quadrant 4. You have social mastery and spiritual presence. Now, social mastery and spiritual presence include some very relevant skills for leaders, which include being a wise and effective mentor, being a wise and effective leader, making calm and compassionate decisions, being a calming and healing presence in the world, and being aligned with the ebb and flow of life. These are the outcomes, the products of the effort that you put in to the preceding 3 quadrants. This little boy, and this is simplified, but you'll get the idea. Skill 5 is the awareness of ego self and higher self. The most basic level of this skill is to know that you have an ego, that it exists and has been shaped by the experiences of your life. At level 2, you can observe your own ego in operation. So this is personal now, it's not just theoretical. At level 3, you can watch your ego. You've been watching it long enough that you are seeing patterns. You're seeing the patterns where you tend to get triggered and go to your small self, your ego self, and operate from there. At level 4, you've been working on developing access to the voice of your higher self slash soul slash spirit. And synonyms are important here. We need to let people use the synonyms they're comfortable with. But learning to hear the voice of spirit. And then 5, your ego is now in joyful service to higher self. These about 10 minutes out of the year. The rest of the year, I'm working at it. It's an effort to keep my ego not running the show.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to keep making effort to hear my higher self, keep making effort to manage my ego.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another skill, a very useful one in the world we live in now, which is being aware of other people's worldviews, skill 7. At level 1, I listen to differing points of view. That's just listening, keeping your ears open and listening, not interrupting. At level 2, I seek opportunities to learn about other people's perspectives, other people's worldviews. So I'm actively engaging now to learn. At level 3, I can tune into other people's perspectives or worldviews even during a conflict. At level 4, that all of us experience as human beings. No matter where we live, no matter what our perspectives are on politics or anything, we all have hopes, we all have fears, and I have compassion for that. And at level 5, through compassion and understanding, I can see through the perspective of others, even those who seek to harm me, which of course is a very saintly level.
Mm.
So let's pause there and see if there's any questions. If we have time, we can get to the last few slides.
Sure. Okay, we do have a question from Abdallah Al-Nafisa. His question is, coworkers sometimes get mean, and I do not want to respond badly, but some bad, weak feelings come to me that hurt my self-confidence. What should I do?
Wow, that's a very deep and important question. There's a combination of things going on there. The first of which is to understand from an stories that we have adopted as children about ourselves, given to us by our culture and our family, that tell us in what ways we are not good enough. I've never met a human that doesn't have a story running inside their head about the ways in which they are not good enough. I'm too short, I'm too tall, I'm too fat, I'm too thin, I'm too dumb, I'm too smart, I'm too this, I'm too that. If your particular story is that you can never make a mistake, I'll just pick that as an example, and someone points out a mistake, a typographical error in your PowerPoint, go into, gee whiz, I'm just useless, I'm worthless, why do I think I can do this job, I'm just a horrible human being, and you spiral down into this depression. Those depressions are a sign, those strong reactions, that it's not the outside stimulus that's the cause ultimately. It's just in the therapeutic world, we often hear from therapists, I'm not a therapist, but I've had many in our culture. In the second half of life, we need to take our story and own it and write our own script for the movie of our life. What is the rest of our life going to look like? And the script that might have been handed to you might have programmed you, installed these hot buttons to say imperfection's not okay and I'm worthless. Fighting back against that internal message is a big part of EQ and then SQ. The distinction I sometimes draw between EQ and SQ is around the depth and intensity of the work. EQ helps you become aware of your triggers. SQ helps you remove them.
Mm-hmm.
SQ helps you see that you are a profoundly valuable human being, independent of the typo. You have value. And from within the faith tradition you come, this might be reinforced. You are beloved in the eyes of the God of your understanding. So understanding and believing that instead of the negative script can be a very healing part of this process.
Mm-hmm.
Huge question. I hope that scratches the surface of an answer.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you very much, Cindy. Let's
Mm-hmm.
see if we have any other questions. One second here. So let me just read. This is from Noor again.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just read it here. Are dependent on each other. Okay, she says what I meant in my previous question is physical intelligence, IQ, and EQ and SQ are dependent on each other to some extent. It might be highly improbable to have a low EQ and high SQ as an example. There should be some proportionate ratio. Can you comment on that, Cindy?
Absolutely true. I can't give you a mathematical ratio, but I can tell you if there's no empathy, there will be no compassion. It's like zero. Empathy has to come first.
Mm-hmm.
So empathy is my ability to understand my interior emotional space, then helps me understand your interior emotional space,
Mm-hmm.
so that your sadness, I can accurately see it in you. It's like, oh, gosh, I just said something that made that person sad. What's going on? And now I can have a more appropriate empathic response to that person and interact effectively. Compassion is one step up, and the way I like to think about it is described in some recent research. Empathy involves certain an echo of their own emotion. So you're feeling grief, I feel it in my body. You're feeling anger, I feel it in my body. And to accurately mentally map, like if this happens, this person's going to be angry. If this happens, the person will be sad. Empathy is exhausting because we can end up, if we're being empathic with people all the time, wearing ourselves out because we're being sad with them, and all that sadness becomes too much sadness. And people on the spiritual path often think, oh my gosh, that's too much. Empathy moves to compassion when one critical thing happens in the brain based on the research so far, which is the part of the brain that gets triggered into kind of a panic, wanting to pull away from the other person's suffering. That part of the limbic system actually deactivates, and this has been shown in compassion-trained monks. They can be present to suffering in the world without feeling this sense of panic and overwhelm that most of us would feel. This makes them able to be sustainably present to the suffering in the world and to act appropriately with emotional intelligence in the world. So to act with wisdom and compassion completely requires EQ. It may require less IQ than EQ. So I would say spiritual intelligence is very dependent on SQ. Where IQ shows up is in complexity and nuance of thinking. Being able to hold a whole bunch of different perspectives does demand some complexity of thinking, and that's where IQ can be very supportive.
Thank you, Cindy. And thank you for your question, Ms. Mester. Um, and she has another question. Do you mean that the upper limit of EQ determines the upper limit of SQ? Yeah, I think that's kind of what you said, Cindy. Would you agree with that?
I've lost sound.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, now I can hear you. Yes, I would say that your limitation on SQ will be constrained if you have not developed EQ. Sometimes people focus in the SQ arena only on having transcendent state experiences, which you can have independent of the other 21 skills of SQ. And you can have transcendent state experiences independent of emotional intelligence, but you will not show up as loving. You will not show up with wisdom and compassion if you are not developing EQ and the other skills of SQ.
Okay.
When are we out of time, dear? I want to have one more slide at least that I get to. Okay, I can't hear anything from your side. I'm going to finish my slide presentation on this slide.
Go ahead, Cindy.
Okay, thank you. A lot of times people say, well, how do I get started? And obviously it's a huge question. It's a lifetime of work. But the idea is that between the events in your life and your responses, can be a thought, an emotion, a word, or a deed, we all need to learn to insert a pause between events and responses. In the pause is all your power. If you are going from the events in your life to a habituated response, just operating on habit, you are operating primarily, most likely, out of your training, which will mostly be activating your egoic self, and you will not really be taking time to consider what is the wise and compassionate response. To develop EQ and even more to develop SQ, we need to learn to insert a pause and bring our higher self intentionally into the question. I like to, with humble curiosity, turn my perspective upside down. And that's the reason for this child standing on their head looking backwards at things, is like, look at something differently and ask myself, what would it take for me to be the one to do this very behavior that's driving that? But my higher self would know better and would know that we all are capable of things that we don't like to think that we're capable of. But, I too could do this if I were similarly upset, or if I had their background or whatever. And from the most loving place I can, I then shift to my higher self and say, what is the noblest thing? What would one of my heroes do? What is the noblest thing I can do in this situation? And respond as best I can from wisdom and compassion. The point I would like to make for those who are interested is that you can email me at cindy@deepchange.com. You can go to deepchange.com to see more resources. On the resources page, there's a lot of free material. And for anybody who might want to get trained, as Akanke is in SQ21, there are certification classes available, and there is one coming up in London in September that might be convenient for a lot of the folks that are listening to this webinar, and that is September 14th through 16th in London. But there are 3 classes this year, one July, one in September, and one in October. I can hear you again.
Okay, great, great. Sorry about that. I'm having connection issues. Okay, so I have a question from Mohammed Safiullah. It says, to what extent are the intelligences genetic?
The only one that seems to be strongly genetic is IQ. Now, in terms of PQ, when I talk about body awareness and being skillful about using your body, that is not so driven by genetics. But in terms of being like an Olympic athlete, that would be more genetically determined. In terms of EQ and SQ, at this point in time, what we seem to see is that while some people are naturally gifted for EQ and SQ, all of us can build these skills. And that's really very helpful to know that it's never too late. You can always start working on this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very encouraging. So another question, let's see here. Okay, that's just a comment. Okay, so I would like to let our listeners know that you can still ask questions. If you have any questions or would like to speak to Cindy, you can raise your hand and I will open your mic. And Cindy, can you tell us a little bit more about the trainings that you were saying? I know that I took the training years ago, and it's been very valuable to me in terms of the work that I enjoy doing with coaching. Can you give an overview of what the training is that you offer?
Yes, thank you. I'll start again because I think we over-talked each other there.
Okay.
SQ21 exists as an assessment that people can take to find out, based on how they answer the questions, so it's a self-assessment, where they are at this moment in time on these 21 skills. When people take that assessment, they get a long report, and the report's quite helpful. But even more than that, they often want to be coached to the assessment, like help me understand what I can work on next. People who go through the SQ21 certification training are getting certified to help other people understand the 21 skill report and take the next steps in their own journey. Mm-hmm. So people who are therapists, coaches, consultants, trainers, religious leaders, any of those spiritual directors, any of those kind of jobs might want to get certified to use the assessment in their work. Mm-hmm. In addition, getting trained in this assessment, even if you don't use the assessment, you understand the 21 skills very deeply, and from that you can more effectively coach and lead, even if you're not going to be using the assessment.
Great, thank you. And let's talk a little bit about your book, Cindy. I'd like to talk a little bit about your book. How long did it take you to write your book? That must have been a great feat for you. How was that journey for you?
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer because the actual writing was about 2 years. The research that went into the book was 8 years. And the lifetime before that was a lot of work.
And tell us about the assessment as well, because I know that part of the when people decide, well, when assessments come onto the market, if you will, there has to be a certain process of validation to ensure that it's a fair assessment, that the way that the scores are tallied have to have some integrity and validation. Can you explain that as well?
Sure. I
Sure, I
didn't
didn't
want to
want to
release
release
anything
anything
until I
until
was
I was
positive
positive
that it
it
was
was
solid.
solid.
So we went
So we
through
went
three
through three
levels of
levels of
research and
research and
validation.
validation.
The
The
first
first
was
was
to
to
verify
verify
that we
that
actually
we
had a
actually
set of
had a set of
skills.
skills.
A
A
critical piece
critical
of that
piece of that
validation
validation
is that
is
we
that
have to
we
have a
have to have a
positive
positive
correlation
correlation
to
to
age.
age.
If you
If
don't
you
have
don't
that,
have that,
you are
you are
measuring a
measuring a
character
character
trait
trait
like
like
introversion or
introversion or
extroversion.
extroversion. Mm-hmm.
If it
If it
is showing a
is showing
positive
a positive
correlation to age,
correlation to
it's
age,
probably a
probably
skill.
skill.
So that
So
was our
that was our
first level.
first level.
The second
The
level
second
was
level
what's
was
called
what's called
construct
construct
validation.
validation.
Are we measuring what we think we're measuring? And then the third level was a cross-correlation between stages of maturity in ego development, meaning maturity as a human being, and scores on the SQ21. All three of those research phases came back positive. I waited for the third one to complete before I started writing the book.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Someone is asking about your book. The title of the book is SQ21, The 21 Skills of Spiritual Intelligence. Um, so I can show a photo of it on my screen. Just a
That would
moment.
be
Let me
great.
just switch back over. Okay. Can you all see my screen? Okay. SQ21, the 21 Skills of Spiritual Intelligence. And thank you for your question. Let's see. Someone is asking how to analyze one's own levels. You take the assessment. Mohammed, there is an assessment. If you want to do an assessment for each one, you can find different assessments. Cindy, do you have recommendations for EQ assessments, PQ assessments? I've tried to find PQ assessments. I haven't found anything yet, but there are lots of emotional intelligence assessments. And if anyone wants to have more information about that, you can send me an email. I can send you some recommendations. But Cindy, do you have any recommendations?
I missed a little bit of the question, but to assess on the SQ21, obviously they can take the assessment either by contacting you, and you could then help them not only get the assessment but a debrief, or they could purchase it retail from deepchange.com. We strongly recommend that you purchase through a coach so that you can get a one-on-one debrief. Most people find when they get the report, even though it's quite detailed, that they have questions. So I would recommend you let Akanke know so that you can purchase one through her. You can also, for emotional intelligence, look at, there's quite a few of them out there, but a very inexpensive one is by Talent Smart. It's not super deep, but it's a helpful, inexpensive starting point. But there are much richer ones available, which I'm sure you can help them with. I have not found a fantastic one for PQ. It's more of a conversation for me when I work with coaches, with clients. I will ask them, tell me about your sleeping habits, tell me about your eating. I'm checking for if they're drinking too much caffeine in the morning and they're hyper caffeinated all day, and then they're having to take sleeping pills or something to go to sleep.
Okay, great. So just we can summarize what we've gone over today in terms of what you've presented for deep intelligence. It's the combination of those four intelligences. And as you said, IQ is definitely important. It's the one that gets you in the door. And then how you stand out from others who have approximately the same IQ is that you cultivate these other intelligences. And at the top of everything, SQ is often commonly called the mother of all intelligences because it's the one that integrates the other intelligences. It's the one that manifests the highest behavior. So,
And I would say it
Cindy, if you want to say
amplifies
anything
all
else
the other
about the integrated
intelligence.
approach to all of the intelligences and summarize what you've shared.
Yes,
Yes,
so
so
IQ,
IQ,
you need to
you need to
develop that.
develop that.
It will
It
get
will get
you
you
into your
into your
field.
field.
You need to maintain your technical skills, that matters. But what will make you successful after you enter your field is EQ, SQ, and PQ, because IQ is taken for granted. It's assumed. It's how you got in there. But what will differentiate you is your good interpersonal skills, taking care of your body so that you don't undermine all your intelligences, and then with SQ, you will integrate and amplify your other intelligences. Quick explanation. When I am in my highest self, I think more clearly. My prejudiced, egoic choices. So SQ amplifies EQ. SQ amplifies my interpersonal skills. I see with eyes that see the human, the whole human. And from that, the person feels it. It's wordless, but they know that you're not judging or manipulating them. There is a connection of spirit to spirit or soul to soul or highest self to higher self that is very powerful and beautiful and effective and can serve the higher purpose of the company or the group very well. And then PQ, of course, is supporting the whole, so it's foundational.
Mm-hmm. And I like to stress how important PQ is because I think it is something that we tend to take for granted or not be as committed to. I like something that you wrote in your white paper about PQ, and I'd like to read it quickly just because it is the foundation. If we are not well, if we're feeling, if we have degenerative health issues, then certainly it's going to impact everything else we do. And ultimately, obviously, if we die from not taking care of ourselves, then everything else is gone. There's nothing else we can do, no impact we can have on our relationships and on the world. So this says if PQ is not in place, attempts to develop all the other intelligences will be stunted. As Abraham Maslow demonstrated in his hierarchy of needs, the lower level deficiency needs must be fulfilled before the individual even becomes aware of some of the higher level being needs. Quote, a hungry man may willingly surrender his need for self respect in order to stay alive, but once he can feed, shelter, and clothe himself, he becomes likely to seek higher needs. If a leader is self deprived, lost my spot here. If a leader is self deprived, he will not have the focus or energy to develop or use cognitive, emotional, or spiritual skills. When we are exhausted, our hormones are out of balance, or our blood sugar levels too low, even high IQ, EQ, and SQ people can make mistakes in logic, become inconsiderate, and see things from a narrow, self-interested point of view. So people who understand the importance of physical intelligence will bring to bear a critical component of good leadership because they will balance their wellness, which will impact the other um, aspects of their leadership. And I think that's really, really very important.
I'm sorry.
Sorry about that, guys.
I hope.
Okay, so
Yeah.
thank you so much, Cindy. Let's see if we have any concluding questions from our attendees. No questions. I want to thank you very much for your pioneering work. I know that it's um, making a great impact in many ways around the world. And how many languages has your book been translated into yet? So thus far.
I think
I think
I think
I
we have
think we have
6
six
languages so
languages so
far,
far. Okay, great.
and we're
And so I'm sure people would be interested in an Arabic translation. I'm sorry, you're breaking up for me, Cindy, so I hope I'm not talking over you because sometimes you drop out, and I understand our attendees can still hear you, but I can't. So I want to encourage our listeners to definitely check out Cindy's book. It's the thing that led me to finding out more about her, and then I took the training, and it's been one of the biggest blessings to help integrate my my how do I say, my passion for self development and sharing self development with others and encouraging and inspiring other people to pursue self development. And Cindy, if you have any concluding comments or anything, I welcome you to share them now. And then we can conclude. I want to let our attendees know that this session has been recorded, and we will definitely share it with all the attendees and share it in our various Facebook groups as well for our Toastmasters organization. Cindy, it's over to you.
thank you.
Thank you.
I would
I would
encourage all
encourage
of
all
you
of
to
you to
investigate this
investigate this
approach.
approach.
It works with
Works with
even the most
even
left-brained,
left-brained,
engineering,
engineering,
sciencey-oriented
sciencey-oriented
people.
people.
It is inspirational to people who may feel like there's never been space for such a meaning-based, values-based, purpose-driven, whole self approach to leadership. So some people are automatically attracted to it. But even I find with very linear, logical thinkers, there's a linear, logical basis to this that gives them a way in. And if you set up the expectations clearly, this is not about changing your religion or any of your beliefs. This is about you learning to be the best you that you can be. And you get to choose how much EQ and how much SQ and how much PQ you want to add to your IQ as a leader. But this has a roadmap for you. For what you want to develop, the roadmap is clear. I'm not going to push you to go where you don't want to go, but the steps are outlined and we know how to help you get there. Most people they relax and they go, okay, great, talk to me about it. And they find it a very helpful approach. So I'd love to see some of you decide to join the SQ21 coaching community or investigate this further for yourselves for your own growth and development. It's been my pleasure and honor to be here. And Akanke, thank you so much for the work you do in the world and for making this possible today.
Thank you so much, and we'll be in touch. Thank you, Cindy.
Mm-hmm.
And to our
Thank
attendees,
you.
thank you for joining us, and look out for the recording. And if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. And Cindy, what's an email for you? A good
It's
email address for
Cindy,
you?
Cindy, at deepchange.com.
Great, thank you. Bye, and take care. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye.